Deep dive.
Deep dive. Let's get into it. We've already spent a decent amount of time.
So much time. But
Yeah.
now we are going in depth on one of the fastest growing industries in the world.
Yes. So this is part 4 of our climate change deep dive series, I suppose. We're talking about the transition to electric vehicles. So last week, we talked about the transition to renewable sources of energy. Electric vehicles are another hugely important part of our transition to stop emitting carbon dioxide and other fossil fuels. According to data from Climate Watch, vehicles accounted for 17% of all greenhouse gas emissions worldwide in 2019. Okay, this is including land use, which means that all of the deforestation that happens and the agriculture that's done. It's still one of the absolute top. I think it's the number 2 source of greenhouse gas emissions.
Wow.
To avoid the disastrous effects of a 1.5 degree Celsius increase in global temperatures set out in the Paris Climate Accords, we will need to replace the more than 300 million internal combustion engine vehicles that are currently on the road with electric vehicles. Okay?
That's insane.
So what does it look like as far as the breakdown in the major markets of emissions caused by vehicles? Interestingly, the richer countries have more of a share of their emissions coming from vehicles, from internal combustion engines. So
that makes sense because they've deindustrialized so much of their employer base, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, less of their jobs are manufacturing.
Yes. So the U.S. is one of the countries with the highest percentages of its emissions coming from its vehicles. We have 31% of our greenhouse gases coming from our cars and other vehicles. The EU is close behind us with 26%. And then you have a country like Japan, which is at 18%, because Japan, it's almost like it's gotten so much more advanced that it's leaned more into public transportation. It has its bullet trains going across its country. It's a much smaller, more compact country, so it makes sense that it can work this way.
Their curve probably looks like this, right? Like it's on the downturn.
Exactly.
Where the United States is just barely turning down.
Yes, but the geography, I can't say enough how big it is.
Yeah, that's
like
what
to be a small, skinny island is extremely helpful.
Yeah.
We are a large, massive block of landmass, as is the EU, obviously. So we tend to need cars more to get around. But then you have China, which is sitting at 8%. You have India, which is sitting at 9%. This is because these still aren't advanced economies by GDP per capita. We talk about China all the time because, yes, it has the second biggest GDP in the world, but on a GDP per capita level, it is not really close to any of these other rich countries. It's not close to the US, it's not close to Japan, it's not close to Western European countries like Great Britain, Germany, France, etc. Because of that, it's still on the lower end, right? Because China is still heavily industrialized. So all of these emissions are coming out of its factory production. And that's just to set the stage of like, where are we looking? Who it has the biggest burdens? I think it's important to know that the US, we're such a big emitter of carbon, and a huge portion of our emissions, the biggest portion of our emissions, comes from our vehicles. So we do have the biggest burden to transition fast.
Which is actually an amazing and beneficial thing for us because the solution is right here, right? The solution to 31% of our carbon emissions is through technology that is already created.
Yes.
Right? There doesn't need to be this big technological breakthrough. There needs to be an upscaling of our industrial capacity to make them, which we will go in depth about.
Yeah.
But as of right now, we have the technology to do it. It's only about doing it. And do we have the political will to do it?
Totally. Which, yes, we're going to get to. There's a lot to go into that. I'm going to give a little bit more of the big picture. What share of the market do EVs have right now? Worldwide, 14% of all new cars sold in 2022 were electric, which is actually awesome. 15% of new cars through the first half of 2023 were electric. And we have a graph here that shows the increase. And my God, is it an exponential increase?
It's just so fast, dude.
1.4% of new car sales in 2017 were electric, 2.3% in 2018, 2.6% in 2019. In 2020, during a COVID year, 4.2% of EVs. In 2021, 8.7% were EVs. In 2022, 14%. So this thing is ramping up super fast. It's exactly what we want to see. But we're still going to talk about where is this happening more? Where is
Yes.
this happening less? Where do we need to ramp up? Where do we have the most burden? So
I want to interject there for a second,
please.
because there, when you said that we have 14% new car sales,
Yeah.
right? That differentiates based on country a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So we look at the EU, we're looking at 25% new car sales, 20% new car sales. We look at the US.
Are you sure?
It's only like 6% new car sales are EVs.
I don't know if it's 20,
Maybe 20.
for the EU. I think it's like 10 for the EU.
And then how could it be 14?
I think it's 25 for China.
Oh,
China's blowing us away
gotcha.
in this.
Gotcha.
That's the data that I've seen at least.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so the US is like 5%. Like we just passed the 5% threshold.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so this is where it gets more interesting. China is absolutely carrying our growth right now. Okay, China sold 25% of its new cars as EVs in 2022.
Oh, that's insane.
It's carrying its weight. Like we talk about how China bears a lot of the brunt. It is the leading emitter in the world, but it's not the leading emitter per capita. And a big part of it is because it is heavily invested in EVs. The EU is still doing better than us. It's at 10%. The US is at 5%. So we're not looking great. Okay. So the question is, why is China doing so well? Why are we not doing so well? Well, China's growth has been so fast because there's a long story here. In the early 2000s, late 90s, China looked at its automobile industry, and it was the general thought was, we can't compete with these legacy German brands, these legacy Japanese brands, these legacy American brands. We're not going to be able to break in domestically, much less internationally. Mm-hmm. Now we're seeing some of these Japanese brands are starting to go hybrid, and they're starting to take a hold on that market. It's probably not a great idea to invest there. But no one's looking at fully electric yet. So maybe this is somewhere that we can get our foot in the door and we can really carve out a niche for ourselves. Plus, it comes with the bonus of curbing our own air pollution, because China has horrible air pollution, and reducing its reliance on imported oil, which we've talked about in our China deep dives about how dependent it is on external sources, including the US, on oil imports to actually power its economy.
Massively rely on international oil.
Yeah, so it liked this idea a lot. Plus, it had the manufacturing capabilities and cheap commodities for gas car manufacturing, because it was still doing a lot of the manufacturing of some of these cars in its country, and that could be shifted. So it started to ramp things up in the early 2000s, and then 2008 hit. Right. And it saw an opportunity with the global financial crisis where it's like, we can help fuel our economy by putting a ton of money into our EVs. Mm-hmm. And from 2009 to 2022, this is always the story with China, right? A ton of government subsidies drives its industries. It poured $29 billion over that 13-year period into EV-relevant subsidies and tax breaks, enabling companies to develop their models even though they weren't selling many cars, right? So they're researching, they're driving their costs down, and they're building out the manufacturing capacity, which is so important to get all of the work done there and make the supply chains cheaper. So China gave these subsidies to everyone, not just national companies. So Tesla got these, which paved the way for Tesla to build a mega factory in Shanghai. Elon met with Xi like 6 months ago or something because of this. They still have really tight relations. And this has really been great for both parties, right? Because Elon and Tesla got all of the subsidies from China that it needed to lower its costs. And China gets the draw of the Tesla mega factory to attract more investment from other companies to fuel the industry and have the knowledge base sitting there on its own shores. Okay? One really cool wrinkle that Chinese manufacturers have done that's been different from Western manufacturers is what they've done with batteries, okay?
Oh, yeah, that's the whole story.
It is totally, so batteries are usually like 40% of the cost of these EVs.
Yep.
So they're a huge deal. Chinese companies have championed lithium iron phosphate batteries, which are called LFP batteries, over lithium nickel manganese cobalt, or nickel manganese cobalt, NMC batteries, which are more popular in the West. So with LFP batteries that China uses, they're cheaper and safer, but there was a gap in energy density. Okay, so the performance worse, plus they performed worse in the cold. They were less reliable. So Western companies were afraid to use them and sell them in cars because of that reliability problem. But since China stuck with it, they made advances in research to close the gap in energy density. So they're able to make their cars that much cheaper and get them out and build its market up faster. Right?
Do we know what the range differences between those batteries are?
That I don't know.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
I don't know if there is a range difference.
Damn.
Maybe there is.
Okay. Because so when I see China has such an amazing strategic advantage over the battery production line. They're number one on the EV battery supply chain ranking, in not just in terms of raw material accessibility, but also their ability to refine it. So China is currently where 80% of global refining of raw materials takes place needed for these batteries. And it has 60% of the world's graphite production, which is needed for these batteries. I mean, it's insane.
It is.
It's insane. Now, on that same list, it ranks the top 25. United States is at 15. The United States does not have a lot of the resources that are needed to mine to get it, and doesn't have the refining capabilities at the moment to really get there.
It's the refinery that's the real.
That's the real
issue.
kicker,
Yeah.
right? Because we can get the raw materials. We've made agreements with Australia, as we talked about, who is number 2 on this list, and they are rich in lithium. It produces almost half of the world's lithium and has the second largest nickel reserves. It is a massive key player in this. But we can get the raw materials. If we can't refine it, that's when we're going to have problems.
Doesn't matter.
Right? It doesn't matter. Now, I want to go into the battery production pipeline.
Please.
Okay, so there's 4 things that you have to think about: the upstream of the battery production, the midstream, the downstream, and then the end of life. So what is the upstream production? Well, that is the least value-added activities. That is the mines extracted raw materials for batteries. These raw materials typically contain lithium, cobalt, manganese, nickel, and graphite. When we look at access to raw materials in a breakdown, China is number 1. Luckily, Canada is also high up there, which is good because we're a good trading partner with Canada. They have a massive nickel reserve in Canada. But that is very, very difficult for us to compete with China when they have such a strategic advantage of the upstream. Okay, and then when we go into the midstream, well, inside of this upstream, there are other things that we have to consider. This is where most human rights abuses are most likely going to happen. When we have mines, that is most frequently linked with child labor and poor labor practices, right? There is a high political concern about the negative impacts of new extractive developments, especially in the United States, about indigenous communities, Native American reserves. In the US, the majority of nickel, copper, lithium, and cobalt lie within 35 miles of Indian country. That's a big issue for us on a human scale, right? But what is good news about the upstream globally is that we have enough minerals. There are enough minerals on the world to make this EV transition. We know it's possible. But this work will require significant investment, and the US alone will need to invest $175 billion in the next 2 or 3 years to match China's battery production.
Yeah.
And that's just for the upstream.
This is just for the raw materials.
Yeah.
That's the issue. And it's hard because it takes where the math starts to get really hard, and this is why like climate change conversations can be really depressing, is that we're racing against the clock, and it takes time to build this infrastructure.
Yeah, it takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
And now the midstream, there is good opportunity for America in the midstream, which is good. So midstream is where America really could expand, and the downstream. Okay, so the United States has a good advantage to expand their capabilities in EVs, batteries through the midstream. So the midstream is the processors and refineries to purify the raw materials to then use them to create cathode and anode active battery materials. So processing, this involves removing unneeded materials from the minerals, and then refining, which involves working with these processed materials to achieve a purity level that makes them suitable for use in many products, including batteries. Now, like the upstream portion of the EV battery supply chain, the midstream portion is concentrated in a very small number of countries right now. The vast majority is done in China. Here we have 70% of cathode capacity and processes and refines more than half of the world's lithium, cobalt, and graphite. I mean, the process to decouple from China is going to be just a national nightmare.
Yeah, this is. I mean, it's this, and it's solar cells and wind turbines, right? This
Right.
is where they have us by the balls.
Yep. It's insane.
Yeah.
Now, it is also the leading refiner of battery metals globally and currently hosts 75% of all battery cell manufacturing capacity, 90% of anode and electrolyte production, and 60% of the world's battery component manufacturing. So China has us by the balls on the midstream right now.
I do wonder how much leverage do they have? How much leverage is it advantageous for them to use?
Right.
Because they want the world to transition. Like, Xi isn't stupid. He might be surrounded by people who are just yes men, which he has made to be the case because he's purged anyone who might ever come at him, right? So he's kind of gotten rid of most of the competent people. But Xi himself knows that it is in China's interest to combat climate change.
I don't even think he's looking at, I don't think that's the calculation. I think his calculation is China's making a lot of money off this. So we want to keep this going for as long as possible.
Okay.
That's what I think, right?
But if money is the end all be all, then the US market is the gold mine.
Yes. But do you not think China wants to break into the US market?
No, I think they do. That's why I'm saying, like, they do have us by the balls, but it only matters if they squeeze.
Oh, right.
Right? So I don't know if it'll ever be in their best interest to squeeze.
I agree with you. I don't think there's an incentive for them to squeeze. No. I think there's an incentive for us to be the buyer right now for them. And, we definitely need to transition away from that and create our own processes. And that's what the Inflation Reduction Act is doing. So China controls like 70% of it. Okay. 70% goes to China. Now, the next two people on the list are South Korea and Japan, but it's not even like close. It's 15% for South Korea, and Japan accounts for like 14% or something like that.
Yeah,
it's like super low. It's nothing compared to what China is capable.
China
of doing.
is it's hilariously dominant in refining capacity.
Yes, but now the U.S. is responding. So as I said before, the U.S. has signed mineral agreements with Australia and Japan and is preparing to boost this part of the supply chain. And through the Advanced Manufacturing Production Credit, it has a massive ability and potential to increase the U.S.'s capacity in this sector. So what this does is it offers $45 per kilowatt hour of battery capacity paid out for this. So you don't just get money for selling the refined material, you get paid money from the federal government just for refining the material at all. That's all, yes.
Yeah, which is kind of what, like, China has this process so down that's the only way that it can be economically viable in
Exactly,
the US.
Exactly. As far as it comes for human rights, which I do think is important to talk about, we definitely need to boost up our traceability of the batteries and to know where they come from. And we need to understand, we need to improve the traceability for human rights so we know what mines are getting used, what companies are doing, what their labor practices are. It's also important so we can understand bottlenecks very fast and protect ourselves from geopolitical risks. We need to know where the batteries are coming from, which is something that's lacking at the moment.
I do agree. It reminds me of the conversation we had about union-driven electric vehicle transitions. And we had a long discussion on whether we were okay selling our souls to corporate overlords to save the planet, basically. And you pointed out, like, you don't think I'd be down for all of us being sold into slavery in order to save the world from climate change.
Yeah.
And I agreed with that. And I think I would also draw the line before children mining in horrible conditions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So now we're on to the downstream. Now, the downstream is battery manufacturers assemble the battery cells into modules and then pack them and sell them to automakers. Now, Chinese, South Korean, and Japanese companies dominate this globally, but some automakers like Ford and Stellantis, in partnership with battery manufacturers in the United States, are starting to produce batteries on their own, and that's what the UAW is fighting to unionize right now. And that's what GM has said, that they are already going to unionize, already in line with collective bargaining. So Chinese, South Korean, and Japanese companies dominate global battery manufacturing. Together, these countries account for 70% of the battery market in 2021. which is just insane.
Yeah.
One company, China's CATL, is 33% of the entire market.
Wow.
One company. South Korea's LG Energy Solution, 22%. Japan's Panasonic, 15%. Massive monopoly, massive market power.
Yeah, that's exactly what we hated to read about in Stiglitz.
Exactly, dude. Oh, the market power that these companies have is insane.
Yeah. I mean, this, like, honestly, I should get off of this podcast and then invest in CATL.
It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we'll do that.
Do that.
Yeah, do that.
Yeah.
We can't, it's not financial advice. That's illegal. All right. North America is poised to become the second largest player in the battery production market, though, because of the effort that is happening with the advanced manufacturing production credit and the IRA. So right now, it's only responsible for 70% of the world's production capacity. What did I say?
70.
Oh, whoops.
Yeah.
Responsible for 7%, but that is going to increase, and it's going to increase fast. Ford is working on diversifying its raw material suppliers. General Motors and LG have partnered to co-locate battery pack and cell production at the time of this writing. They have one active plant in Ohio and have plans to open 2 others in Tennessee and Michigan. And those are the ones that GM has said that they will be collectively bargaining with the UAW. Incredible.
Cool.
And then end of life. Batteries no longer serve their original purpose. They can be reused or recycled. Right now, most of that is in China, but that needs to change.
Yeah. I mean, they kind of need to be. I mean, the raw materials do exist, but it's going to be, we're going to get more return on investment by ramping up some of our recycling capabilities and reusing those materials than continuing to get the diminishing returns of more mining.
Totally. And that's why like so many like phone companies want you to return phones back to the Verizon store, because they make money selling that phone back to somebody.
Totally.
They make a lot of money selling your broken and old phones, because all that stuff that's in there, all the aluminum, all the graphite, that's expensive. I mean, they want it.
They can probably, like, most of the chips, like, they don't need to melt down the metal and reuse it. They're just taking the chips right out of there, and they're like, yeah, we can keep working with these.
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah. And we know a lot about chips. One of the many themes of this show. So what are the biggest obstacles of scaling up? For Chinese companies, it might be precarious to sell in big US, Japan, EU, Canada markets with geopolitical tensions. So that's interesting, because that makes it hard for EU and the US to make it if their Chinese counterparts are reluctant to sell. But we've kind of talked about how I don't think that's going to happen, right?
No. They want, it's the same strategy China's employed for decades. They gain power by being an exporter, right?
Yes.
By having other countries dependent on them as a manufacturer.
Yes.
So I think these companies will be hopeful, at least, to export. And we're just going to see whether the government cracks down at all.
Right. And now, here are some of the bottlenecks specifically in the United States first, and then we'll go a little global here. So in the US and EU, car makers have really prioritized increasing how far electric vehicles can travel on one charge. So even though the energy density is getting better, we're using the improvements we've gotten to go longer range instead of lowering the cost. Which is hard, especially in the United States, which is such a big country that doesn't have a lot of good public transit. It is important that these things can travel for long periods of time.
Either travel for long periods of time or have a more robust charging network.
And we will talk about the charging network, because we've made progress there.
Yeah.
Because right now we are lacking at the moment. The EV market also currently lacks economies of scale. We don't currently have massive companies that are producing EVs that can just churn out 4 a day. You know what I mean? That doesn't really, a bit. I don't know how many you make a day.
No, China does.
Right. China does.
China does. And that's, again, last week we talked about the learning curve with solar and wind that's pushed their cost, their marginal cost down below any fossil fuel sourced energy generation.
Right.
China they're further along to have driven that learning curve up, where like the cost is going down and down. Like the cost is getting less and less the more and more they produce.
Exactly.
And we're further behind on that curve.
Yes.
But even China still isn't, like, they haven't really hit the exponential point of that curve.
Right.
They have ways to go.
Right. The United States, I think that the United States should totally invoke the Defense Production Act and really take government's heavy hand and make all this stuff happen ASAP. I think the Defense Production Act is, I can't think of another thing that's more necessary.
I think it's I don't know. Heavy executive action just scares me. I agree with the efficacy of it, but it's the type of, I don't know. I always hear Chancellor Palpatine's words ringing in my ear.
No, I get it.
Needing emergency powers, because it's not what the Defense Production Act was meant for, right? To make
is
EVs.
it? I think it is.
No, because we're not at war.
Well, we're at war with the climate change. It's going to kill us all. I mean, it's going to kill more people than any war ever, right?
True, but
I think
I want Congress to declare.
See, this is what's funny. This is exactly what Bernie said in 2016. He was asked on the debate stage with Hillary Clinton, what is the largest geopolitical problem, or like who is our biggest threat internationally? And he said climate change. He said that on purpose. He said that so that he would have the legal authority to declare a climate emergency and invoke the Defense Production Act, because it's our largest geopolitical national security issue.
Yes.
Because it destroys everything. Right.
True.
So there's a legal argument to be made.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, getting off the prescription here about the DPA, research firms have estimated that due to material shortages, battery cell prices may surge throughout the next few years, which is really unfortunate. And that's because we don't have the mining or refining capability to get the materials ready as fast as we need them. Yeah. We have the materials in the ground, but we don't have the capability to get them out of the ground and refined at the scale that we need. So there are suggestions that prices will surge 22% from 2023 through 2026, peaking at $138 per kilowatt hour before they resume a steady decline through 2031, which will then possibly get them to as low as 90 kilowatts per kilowatt hour, which is great. But for these next 4 years, there is definitely still going to be an issue getting EVs to a reasonable price point.
Yes, I agree with that. I think we're almost fortunate. Maybe this is a problem that like Tesla's going to lead this, but they're really going. All these car companies are going to be trying to push their prices as low as possible, because they can see that right now the time to gain market share is there.
True.
Right. And it isn't a really saturated market with really established players. Mm-hmm. So I think that's going to be good for the consumer. I also think the fact that auto companies themselves are investing directly in lithium mines all over the world.
Yep.
And like they're sending their people to prospect at these mines and buy directly from them is definitely going to help obviously ramp up the supply of the needed materials faster. There will still be a little bit of a gap, but the right moves are being made to catch up.
And on top of all that, right, this only emphasizes how necessary it is to recycle these materials.
Yeah.
If we're going to be this short on the materials in the next 4 years, there's a massive incentive for the market. If you're like in the battery industry, you're going to want to become a recycling company right away.
Yes.
And so now I want to talk about the electric vehicle battery recycling market is projected to reach $2.2 billion by 2025, growing at a CAGR rate of 41.8% from 2018 to 2025. Wow. That's insane. It's insane. Now, the U.S. Department of Energy has projected that recycled material could potentially provide 1/3 of United States cathode materials needed for lithium-ion batteries by 2030.
That's fantastic.
And so that is the beauty of capitalism. There aren't many of them. That's the beauty of it.
Hey, let's not.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Listen.
Capitalism does good things. We could argue about that.
This is one of them that does good. Okay.
Yeah.
It immediately was like, oh wait, there's money to be made here. Let's go right away.
Exactly.
And
sometimes the profit motive aligns with the common good.
Sometimes that happens, and when it does, oh baby, nothing is better than that.
It's amazing.
And that's how we have 1/3 of U.S. cathode materials for ion batteries by 2030 coming from recycled materials. It's insane.
That's great.
No, it's insane. This next chart I have here is just talking about what portion of the cost is batteries, and you can see batteries are 40% the cost.
Yeah,
easy. It just gets insane. Now we were talking a lot about the current state of our charging infrastructure. Now this is really interesting. Currently in the U.S., we only have 58,000 across the whole country. You can go on the Department of Energy's website and actually look at a map where all of them are.
Yeah.
I guess that's to map out road trips.
Yeah, exactly.
right? But there's only 58,000 of them in the whole country. Well, Congress, a part of its bipartisan infrastructure bill, has allocated $7.5 billion to build 500,000. That 500,000 from 58,000.
It's amazing.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's like 1,000% more.
That's going to take us overnight
Yeah.
into an electric vehicle possible infrastructure.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like there's still, I feel like even 58,000 might be enough. Not completely enough, but the map I'm seeing, at least enough for regional. Like they're viable in the Northeast.
Oh yeah, they're
Right?
viable in the Northeast.
They're viable in the Northeast. They're
South,
not.
they're not.
They're not viable in the South. No, they're viable on the West Coast in California. Right? Maybe it's going to get iffy as you go up through Portland and Seattle a little bit, but regionally,
Northeast, you're
they're
chilling.
covered. Yeah.
You're chilling if you're in the Northeast. You want to get an EV, you're chill.
Yeah.
But other countries are doing better with their EV transition than others. And I want to focus on China's, as you said, and kind of how nations are mandating the transition to EVs.
Okay.
And how the United States is behind on that. Okay. So in Norway, it aims to have 100% zero emission cars by 2025. If we look at a chart right now, I think it's 93% of all new cars are EVs. I think it's 93%, something around there. It's 85 to 93.
Okay.
Netherlands, 100% electric vehicle sales by 2030. Looks like they're going to hit it. India, 30% electric mobility by 2030. China, 20 to 25 of new car sales be electric by 2025. They already hit it.
Wow.
France, ban on fossil fuel powered cars by 2040. Full ban on fossil fuel cars by 2040. UK, ban on sale of new petrol and diesel vehicles by 2030 and hybrids by 2035. Massively mandating this. Germany, ban on combustion engines by 2030. The United States does not have an equivalent to that.
And I saw a survey today that's extremely relevant to this. And part of the reason that we're lagging is cultural.
Yeah.
Because, and you can just feel it. Like, I would have a hard time putting it into words, but it does feel like there is something American about driving a gas-powered car. For that reason, when they were surveyed, 46% of American adults said that they want to drive a gas-powered car.
God, that's so depressing. Why?
It's brutal. I mean, I know.
I know. It's just so depressing that it's become political.
Yeah, I know. We need, I don't know. We need a loud electric vehicle.
Yeah,
almost.
That's so funny. Could you imagine an electric vehicle that revs like it's just like a speaker?
Yeah, we need an electric vehicle that's designed just to make people think that it is a gas-powered car.
Yeah.
But it's a real problem. There's someone who's our friend Matt, his brother is up with us right now, and we were talking about this, and he was in the conversation. He's like, "Yeah, I want a gas car." Yeah, it's just like a preference for some
That's so funny.
car lovers. Yeah,
that's so funny. I know it's a nightmare though. It's something that we got to break.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about it, I kind of can liken it to veganism.
Yeah, sure.
Right? I know that veganism is better for the environment, and I think the vast majority of people who know that aren't vegan.
True.
I know
fair.
that. So,
I'll never go vegan.
Exactly. Right? So that's
fair.
That's tough. That's
fair.
tough. But it also I don't know, it feels like that's more intrinsic to the experience. Here's the thing. I could go vegan if I had foods that felt and tasted exactly like the non-vegan foods that I like.
If synthetic meat, which I'm a big believer in synthetic meat,
Yeah.
if synthetic meat reaches the good stage where it tastes just like cattle beef, I'll never eat cattle beef again.
Exactly. So that's the thing. We're already there with electric cars, and yet because it's politicized, because it's some kind of status symbol to have a gas-powered car. I don't know what exactly status it's giving you, but it is giving you something. People aren't completely there.
Yeah. United States might not have an equivalent to a mandate, but it has something similar to cap and trade across the country. Now, it's not in every state, but some states have opted into this program, the ZEV program. What this does is it assigns each automaker ZEV credits. Automakers are required to maintain ZEV credits equal to a set percentage of non-electric sales. So they're only allowed to have a certain percentage of non-electric sales, just like cap and trade. You can only have a certain percentage of carbon emissions. Each car sold earns a number of credits based on the types of ZEVs and its battery range. The credit requirement is 7% in 2019. So this is how it's kind of working. This was started in California, which will require about 3% of the sales to be CEVs. Now, this is expanded across the country. It exists in Oregon, Washington, California, Nevada, New Mexico, Colorado, Minnesota, New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Vermont, Maine, Virginia, Maryland, New Jersey. There are some equivalents in Texas and Illinois and Michigan, but not really. There's purchase incentives, but it's not the ZEV system.
Okay.
But I think that's a really good American solution.
I agree.
Right?
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like you're not taking the market into your own hands. You're just tweaking a little bit.
Yes. And now what's great is automakers, this is what we talked about with cap and trade, and now determines the price of petrol vehicles because you can, if you go too high, like if you exceed your ZEV credits, you can put your ZEV credits on the market. Other companies that have not reached their ZEV credit limit yet can buy your ZEV credits on the market, and they can decide when it becomes not profitable anymore to move away from petrol.
Yeah, that's really cool.
I think that's really great. I think it's an awesome system. And now the last thing I have on here is talking about the U.S. market share and what companies are currently dominating.
Okay.
That's the last thing I got.
Yeah.
Tesla currently makes up 53% of EV sales in the U.S. After that, it's 10% with Chevrolet. Toyota's at 7%. BMW's at 6%. Honda's at 5%. Nissan's at 4%. What have you noticed about all these yet? Have you noticed anything? Because I've noticed something, and it's really sad.
Non-union.
Non-union, and not in the U.S. except Tesla.
Yeah.
Not union, though, baby. And then we get to Ford, which is at 2.5, Chrysler 1.9. Oh.
The debate that we had.
Are unions going to be able to capture this industry? It's so scary.
Well, here's the real question. Are companies going to be able to let go of their near-term greed?
Right? To transition to gas?
Like to cut the salaries of executives, to stop the stock buybacks. Will they be able to do that? I don't know.
I don't know.
I'm doubtful.
I'm doubtful too.
They're just too used to their lifestyles.
The Congress needs to pass legislation that bans stock buybacks. Stock buybacks used to be illegal until the 1980s, and it was considered market manipulation. And then under our favorite president, Ronald Reagan, of course, he took that regulation away.
Yeah.
Now, without that incentive, the companies would be forced to reinvest in production to grow their profit margins instead of and to return value back to shareholders instead of just buying back their own stock. But Ford only controlling 2.5% of the market is so sad. But what's crazy to me is, right, Tesla is 54% of all EV sales, but only 1% of all car sales.
This is right now?
This is right now.
Okay.
Tesla is 54%. Does that make sense? No, it might be 2 years ago. This might be 2 years ago data.
Yeah. It looks like 21.
Yeah, okay, yeah. This is 2021 then.
Yeah.
But I just think it's crazy that Ford and Chrysler are so far behind. It's not even Chrysler anymore, it's Stellantis.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's crazy.
They're saddled with unions.
Yeah, shut up. Fucking. All right. Well, that is EVs. America has a lot of work to do, and we are in a tight race with China and the rest of the world. But I'm hopeful with the Inflation Reduction Act that we've made progress.
Yeah,
here.
That's the thing. Our eye is definitely on the ball. This is in the media. This has the attention of the president. That's where it needs to be, right? That means it should just be a matter of time.
Hell yeah. Cool. Thanks, guys.
Goodbye.